Welcome to another Cura Property on the Ground podcast. And today we're going to talk about the legal side of buying property. This is something that's not often talked about or seen in the news or the media, but it's a hugely important part of buying a property, especially if you're buying and selling your home, but particularly as a buyer's agent. If you're buying for your first time as a first home buyer or your first property, but definitely a part of the property purchasing process that is not talked about enough, in my opinion. And we've got a special guest, someone who I've worked with for a long, long time, who looks after pretty much most of Cura Property's clients and very, very experienced in the world of property conveyancing. Amanda Bennett from Elan Legal. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Ramon. Nice to be here.
Great. It's been a while. We've been wanting to get you on the podcast for a while, and it's as we record this podcast, it's close to Christmas. So it's great to be able to get you just before Christmas, particularly because there are changes in New South Wales to the way stamp duty works for first home buyers, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But it's a really good time, I think, to have you on board and to be talking about this particular topic. So what I'd like to do is actually just start with a really basic question. What is conveyancing?
So conveyancing is literally the legal transfer or conveyance, which is where the word comes from, of property. So if you're buying property, if you're selling property, you're conveying property. So that's where the word conveyancing comes from. So property lawyers, conveyancers, we do the same thing in that conveyancing space. We transfer property ownership. So that's it.
Okay, cool. So it's basically the way that property gets transferred from the person selling it to the person buying it, to make sure it's recognised, I guess, and recorded legally. Is that kind of a fair, simple statement?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So we've got a system of property ownership. So it's called Torrens Title or Strata Title. And so when you buy property, you need to be registered on that title as the owner. So and when you borrow money to buy property, the mortgagee needs to be noted on that title as well. So there's that registration process.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, pretty important. I'd imagine to want to have your name to be legally registered as the owner, and I'm sure whoever's lending you the money, if that's what's happening, they want to be pretty much recognised as well, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's that's part of what we do is making sure our clients' interests are protected. So that interest is your name on the title and your correct name.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we'll go on to Torrens Title and Strata Title a little bit later. But what I'd like to know is property conveyancing and the property law side of things. How did you actually end up becoming a property conveyancer? Is it something that you kind of wanted to do? Is it something you kind of fell into, or that led you? What was it that led you to being that person who actually looks after clients on the legal side?
Look, I studied at uni. I did a Bachelor of Business, and I actually majored in human resource management and marketing. So not at all anything to do with law. Law was sort of a second option. And then I did sort of fall into it. I started working for law firms. And in Adelaide, I moved to Sydney and I worked for a couple of the bigger law firms. Most recent one was Colin Biggers and Paisley, huge, big property law firm, and really loved what they did. And they were a great firm to work for, and I was quite passionate about the whole process. So I decided to study. So I studied conveyancing law and practice, Macquarie Uni, and became a conveyancer. And I really enjoyed it. Still enjoy it 15 years later.
Cool. All right. So. And I'm going to be honest, right? Like, as someone in the property industry, conveyancing is often that part of the buying process that is most mysterious to buyers. So everyone, people who work with real estate agents and buyers agents obviously know what we do or what selling agents do. The role of someone like a mortgage broker is pretty obvious. The role of a property conveyancer, you've kind of broken that down in its most simplest terms. But tell me, I guess, what is it that you have enjoyed about being a conveyancer? I mean, it sounds all quite legalese to me, but obviously having worked with you, there is more to it. What is it that's been the most enjoyable part of what you do?
Oh, look, I think guiding clients through usually their biggest purchase of their life and their biggest life change, as you would know, it's quite a thrill to be able to help people, whether they're buying their first property, whether they're upsizing to, their dream property, whether they're downsizing, whether they're doing a sea change or a tree change. These are all massive life decisions, and being able to guide them, knowing that you're protecting their interests, is really important to me. It's something I really enjoy, and love getting that sort of satisfaction from the clients as well, where they're really thrilled and happy with the process, and they get to collect the keys at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's a massive journey, and being part of that and being able to make it a smooth process for our clients, so that they're happy and they're confident and they enjoy the process, is such a big thing, and such an important thing compared to something that is stressful, or they're sort of frustrated, they don't know what's going on. That can make it a really negative experience. But that's a big deal to me, is that I make it a really enjoyable experience.
Yeah, and I guess that human side is probably the bit that you often don't realise. That is an important part of the process, particularly whether you do what I do as a buyer's agent or what you do as a conveyancer. Yes, we're often dealing with people who are making essentially a huge life decision. I guess from my side of things, the real big moment for me with clients is when I get to call them and say, look, your offer's been accepted, you've bought a property, congratulations. I'd imagine for you it's not dissimilar to when they get the keys to the property, which is the settlement stage. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We send our clients a text now, just because it can be in the middle of the day, they can be in meetings, they all sorts of things going on, not always available to talk to. So just a text that when settlement's actually been completed, with a big congratulations, lots of emojis. That's something that I think is just it's how clients want to interact now. They want something a little less formal. They want people to be have that personal touch. Your conveyancer to have that personal touch, not talk in legal speak, be able to break it down and say, look, these are the basic. This is what we basically need. This is what's going to happen. At the end of the day, this is the result. Your settlement.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting in this world that we are the way we communicate between clients and ourselves is changing a lot. It is a lot more WhatsApp, a lot more messaging services, and it's interesting that emojis. It's something that we take for granted quite a lot, but they are quite effective in conveyancing how our clients feel, especially in a world where they just often don't have time to pick up the phone when we call them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just being able to send a text or, we do everything online now. There's no need to come in. We can Zoom, we can just talk on the phone, we can do email. People do these sort of things at night. They've maybe got kids to bed, or, they finished a late meeting or something like that. Yeah. And then they can go, right, now I can sit down and read this, or I appreciate that's the time that they're probably doing things, and they want it kind of kept short, so it's not bogged down in loads and loads of detail they don't really need to know. So yeah, you're right, absolutely. It is a great way to communicate in the way that people want to be communicated to.
Yeah, that's right. And you talked about process. You talked about how communications change. Maybe what if we go back to kind of the start of the process? Like when do we actually, as a buyer, when do we start to consider, talking with or engaging someone like yourself during the buying process?
Yeah, good question, because I think the earlier the better. So once you've got your mortgage broker and you've got your pre-approval and they've engaged you, and they've had those initial conversations with you around, this is what we're looking for. Or, if someone's not using a buyer's agent, generally we'll say, look, it's good to have someone on your side because we can't give them the kind of information you can. So, but that's the time as well. I think you want to get your team in place early. You want to have your mortgage broker, you want to have your buyer's agent, and you want to have your conveyancer, because the more we all talk together, including the client. So you've got 4 people on your team, ideally, and the more we can communicate early, we can all be on the same page, and then get you as a client in the best position to move quickly. Because as you know, sometimes you've got to move really quickly, much quicker than they ever expect, or sometimes they're comfortable with doing, so it's about being really prepared. And as you know, being prepared for anything gets you the best result.
And just on that, like that's really helpful. I agree that it's important to get your team together as early as possible. What, and often when we're in buying situations where we're negotiating, things can happen really, really quickly. What, I guess, with that comes with it some risks. I know from our experience that I'm often pushing a situation where we're negotiating. We're up against other buyers who are, making offers to buy the property, and we're trying to secure the property for the buyer as possible. Can you identify sort of where are some of the risks, or what are some of the risks that face buyers when they're under that kind of pressure? And in particular, if they're not working with a buyer's agent like myself, if they're dealing directly with a real estate agent, what are some of the things that you've found as someone who works for the buyer in a conveyancing perspective? What are the things that, I guess, the risks that they can be put under or take themselves, that you can really step in and say, hang on, just wait a sec, let's take a closer look at this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say to clients, look, forward a copy of the contract to me so I can look at the contract first. That's really important because you don't know what's in it. Most of the time a contract can be fairly straightforward, but there can be things in there that you really need to be aware of, and they can influence how much you want to pay for a property as well.
Yep.
Simple things like, there might be a lot of maintenance that's required. No property's perfect, but there could be things that require a fair amount of money, a fair amount of outlay. So be aware of those. So send me a copy of the contract, send it to your mortgage broker as well, because mortgage brokers will be able to say, your bank that we've identified as being the best for you may have a problem with that area, or so there's all sort of things to consider. So the more the information you give to your team early, the better position you'll be in. And also get a building and pest report if it's a house, get a strata report if it's a property. We can help with that. Quite often a real estate agent will have either of those reports available to access quickly. So that's really important to have a look at those reports. Strata reports will give you a really good idea of what's happening in the building and that particular apartment. Yeah. And a building and pest report will give you a really good idea of the condition of the property. All properties look great. They're meant to look great for sale. People put a lot of effort into that. If they're styled, they can look fantastic, but you don't know what's behind the scenes. So those reports are really important. So do that as well. And go to auctions if you've never been to an auction before. Things like that, just to familiarize yourself with the process, and speak to real estate agents as well about the process. There's a lot of good agents that you can speak to about, how are we going to do this? When should I make an offer? Maybe not always the agent that's selling that particular property, but there's information you can find out as well before you make offers.
Okay, that's great. So just focusing a little bit on that part where, as a buyer, I have a contract, I send it to you just to, I guess, talk about when and how I do that. So I've seen a property, I've inspected it. I then, if I like it, is that the time when I say I say, look, I need a contract and I get it to you? Or should I wait until, auction, or wait until, I'm ready to make an offer? How soon should I be asking the agent for a copy of the contract and sending it to you?
Yeah, look, if you really like a property, get it then. If you see a property, you've done an inspection, you really like it, get a copy of the contract sent to your conveyancer. And then, conveyancer should also suggest send it to your mortgage broker as well,
Yep.
just so they're aware of the address of the property and, what type of property it might be, whether it's a townhouse, house, apartment. But yeah, definitely a conveyancer should get it early so that we can do a quick review initially or a full review, depending on the sort of time available. But, definitely want to have your conveyancer or property lawyer review that contract.
Okay, so send you the contract, and is that when you start, is that when you negotiate, or you review all the terms of the contract and negotiate, or do I wait for that later? I think one of the things I've come across working with buyers in the past is that they're very sensitive on understanding, okay, well, when do I make all this happen? And as you know, it can happen very quickly. So when I send you the contract as a buyer, am I expecting you to negotiate for me? Am I expecting you to review all the terms of the contract straight away? Or is there another kind of trigger before you really start to do that?
Yeah, look, it depends if the property is going to auction. If you know that, if the real estate agent said the property is definitely going to auction and it's, say you saw a property one weekend and it's going to auction the following weekend, then you should send the contract to your conveyancer or property lawyer on Monday. I would suggest as soon as possible. And then they'll normally say that, anywhere between 24, 48 hours, they'll need to review the contract. And so when I do it, I would review the contract, send my client a written review of the terms and conditions of the sale, pointing out the really important ones, any special conditions in the property, in the contract. And then I would also suggest, look, this is what I think we can negotiate in the contract. And also, what are important to you? What terms are important to you? Would you like a longer settlement or a shorter settlement? We need to negotiate that. Do you want to pay 5% deposit rather than the 10% deposit? So things like that do need to be negotiated. They need to be in writing. The sooner that's done, the better. So, if a property was going to auction on a Saturday, having everything in place ideally by the Thursday before. So having your contract reviewed, looking at any strata report or building and pest report, and having your conveyancer write to the vendor's conveyancer or solicitor and request any amendments are made to the contract and have that agreed to. We also asked questions about the property as well. So just additional things that aren't covered in contracts we ask. So we've got a fairly standard letter that we send out. So we make sure that we know as much as possible about the property for our client.
Yeah, and that's really great, Amanda. And in the way we've been working together, I think that sequencing is really important. So one tip I always have when I work with buyers is, first of all, understand whether that price guide or the property price is potentially within your budget. And if it is, and it's definitely a property that you like and you're potentially keen to go for, that really should then be the trigger to send the contract to your conveyancer. And really, you want to get an idea from your conveyancer as to whether there's any deal-breaking issues within the contracts, any major issues that you would suggest, hey, look, I'm not sure if I'd buy this property, before you even consider making any kind of offer or confirming with the agent, what sort of price or budget you're going to go into the auction with. Because, in that process, and we call that, that due diligence process where you're reviewing the contract, you're reviewing the strata report or a building and pest inspection report if it's a house. I think once you've clarified or you've read all of those things, that'll give you a much stronger idea of what the property is like, what the terms are of buying the property are, and then that should give you a much clearer idea of, okay, well, this is what I'm prepared to pay for this property based on everything that I've learned from the contract, from what I've learned from the reports, and I can confidently go into a situation where I'm going to auction or I'm going to make an offer on the property, knowing what's going on with the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and that's really great. And I think this is where, as a buyer, knowing the role of who is who and your conveyancer can really help you understand, okay, well, if I'm going to bring a conveyancer on board and I know what that person does for me, what their role is, and when I should be bringing them on board, it then starts to give you a time frame for when things should happen and make that process, one, less mysterious, but secondly, give you a clear window as to what you should be doing and when, and who does what and when. So with that in mind, Amanda, I guess, are there any kind of examples that you see within a contract or any situations that you've seen where buyers often overlook it, or an agent in trying to sell the property want to push things through where you say, hang on a second, look, you need to know this. These are really important things before you go ahead. Are there any sort of things that have come up on on a regular basis, or any out there issues that have come up where where people said, God, thank God, you looked at the contract or reviewed it, because I was going to go ahead without that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look, apartments, the big one is, has the vendor done any renovations to the apartment, and has it been approved? So if it hasn't been approved, then that's something to be really aware of, particularly as well with strata buildings. There's a lot of apartments that are really popular, particularly in the eastern suburbs, that were built in the 70s and 80s. And concrete spalling in those buildings is a big deal, and
right,
quite often
concrete cancer.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, concrete cancer. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, being aware of what's happening in the building, and being aware of what kind of costs are upcoming in a building, particularly when you're looking at strata apartments. So, with that, are there any special levies that are going to be raised? So, levies are payments that you need to make as an owner to what's known as the owner's corporation. So that can be a big expense, and if you don't know that's not in a contract. That's something you'll find out in a strata report. So that's a big thing to look out for. Yeah, and also with if you're looking at buying houses, we act for clients all over New South Wales, so it can be a city house or a rural property, but boundaries of the lot are quite important to be aware of too. We recently had one in Surrey Hills where part of the backyard was actually on another lot, so no one was aware of it, and it was just something I looked at and realised that the plan of the land was different to what it looked like visually, and that was just because I saw it on the ad on the agent's website. So that was quite an unusual out there one where that was about a $150,000 $200,000 mistake that someone could have made, because the backyard was actually cut in half. So that was very unusual. But
that's a bit out there.
Yeah, like I say, if you and the interesting thing with that was that the vendor wasn't actually particularly fully aware of the situation and the consequences, and the property was withdrawn from sale. And so, that is a really unusual situation, but and our clients particularly loved the property, but they didn't go ahead for that reason. There was
and you think it's something that you'd think in the 21st century wouldn't be an issue. But it sounds like, I think what we need to remember is Sydney, for example, is a city that's over 200 years old. So one thing people don't think about is, Sydney might have been zoned in different ways over that period of time. Councils change. Torrens title is something that's, more a 20th century thing, not like 19th or 20th century. It's not something that's always been around. And so I think what you're saying is, part of the risk is to make sure that the property as it's registered is what it is when it's advertised for sale by the agent, and it may not be a deliberate thing by the agent. It may just be what people have assumed the whole time, but may have got missed from time to time. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. In this case, the agent wasn't aware of it. It really wasn't an obvious thing. It was something that you really had to look into. And I'm glad that I looked into it, because it was certainly a big issue, and it was good for everyone to be aware of it.
Yeah, cool. And so we've done our due diligence. You've reviewed the contract. We've gone, we've everything looks okay. So one thing I kind of want to talk about, and it's sort of a broad-based statement, right? But I think it's an important thing to highlight. And there's a saying that says, anything is negotiable when you're buying, and that's why contracts exist. So when I use that word, and what I found as a buyer's agent is, we've been able to negotiate things like, settlement dates or the deposits. But what about when things go wrong? And I'm going to be deliberate here and point to a very recent example that you and I worked on, where we had buyers who actually bought first on the Central Coast and then needed to sell their Surrey Hills place. So maybe just, can you walk us through, what do you see as your role as a conveyancer when it comes to those kinds of negotiations, and what is it important about what you do to make sure that all kind of happens and is official?
Oh yeah, our role is crucial. Your conveyancer is the one that is going to do the negotiations and for you, and it must be in writing and it must be in the contract. So for that to be official and something you can rely on, your conveyancer or solicitor needs to do that for you. So you can speak to the selling agents initially about what you'd like to do, what's important to you, what you really need. In that situation, yes, our clients bought a beautiful property on the Central Coast, and they wanted to sell their property because they needed the funds from that sale. So our role in that is to make sure that we then prepare a contract for the sale of their property, and in that contract we make sure that the settlement dates marry up. So they want to settle simultaneously. So if you need funds from the sale of a property to go towards the purchase of a property, that settlement date needs to be simultaneous. So you need to buy and sell exactly the same day, exactly the same time, and then funds can go from one to the other. So that's really crucial that that's formalized in the contracts, and your agent needs to make sure that happens. So any kind of changes like that.
Yeah, and that's a really crucial point, Amanda, because with what I do, and it doesn't have to involve a buyer's agent, but there's that really basic and fundamental situation where you might agree, or the agent and the seller might agree something verbally, but it actually means nothing until it appears on the contract. And then more to it than that, not only does it need to appear on the contract, but it needs to be written in a way that makes sure that you're kind of not put in between a rock and a hard place. So I think, it's one thing to be able to negotiate from my end as someone who negotiates as part of my job, but really there's been times where I think it's important, and it's important to know this, where we'll negotiate something, but when you try and translate that into a legal sense, it then becomes really important to make sure it's worded properly. And that's something that certainly I don't do, and I can't do as a buyer's agent. And that's where, as a conveyancer, as someone who works on the legal side, it is really important to have you there, so that you can ensure that the way it's worded isn't going to put you in a I guess a squeeze or in a negative position when it comes time to when you need that particular situation to come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. So just another example, I had a client who was purchasing down the South Coast, actually, and beautiful brand new property, but there was some things wrong with the property. So our client absolutely loved it, but to be able to go ahead with the purchase, we wanted to make sure that what needed to be completed with the property was done before settlement. So in that case, just back to your point about making sure things are in the contract, drafting a special condition to put into a contract is something that I do, and to make sure that that's really clear, and that it makes sure that the vendor is required to do certain things, and they're required to do them before the settlement date, and then what happens if they don't do them. So all these sort of eventualities, we need to make sure that we are really clear on those and that they're in the contract, and then that way all parties can rely on it.
Yeah, that's right. And with that, as we move, there's two more things that I kind of want to cover now that we've talked about that and use the word settlement. So I've bought the property, I've signed the contract to buy the property, yeah, happy days, but you still have to go through the process of borrowing the money and getting the keys. So, and often there's kind of a lag period between, you've signed the contract, the loan contracts have been signed as well. And there's usually like 2-3 week period where you're trying to get, I guess, as a buyer, you're organizing removalists. But it seems like there's kind of a lull period that's happening and almost nothing is going on. Is that true from your end, or are you doing, what are you doing in the meantime?
Look, it's a little bit like, that duck. It's all smooth on the surface, but there's a lot of massive paddling happening underneath. So,
Right.
your normal settlement period you'll see on contracts is 42 days or 6 weeks.
Yes.
So the reason for that is that banks will normally say 4 weeks is what they need. So it sort of builds a couple of weeks in as well for just contingencies. So in that 6 week period, as a buyer, you might think like, fuel, all the huge stress and the work's all been done. We finally got the, contract signed. We've paid the deposit. Like you said, we're going to sign the loan contracts the loan documents pretty shortly after that, normally within about a week, sometimes 2, depending on how long the banks take to get those loan documents to you. And then what do we do? So you'll find that your conveyancer will then say, okay, these are the documents that we need you to complete. We email them to our clients. They can be signed using electronic signatures. Doesn't need to be wet signed, can be emailed back. So during that period of when you've signed the contract to just before settlement, we're making sure that we've got the documentation we need you to complete, which is we settle everything via Property Exchange Network now. So that's an online settlement platform. So we need authority from our clients to do that. So that's one form. And then there's a form called a purchaser transferee declaration. We send that out, and that gives us all the information we need to be able to stamp the contract and transfer. So that needs to happen. And then we also order council rates, water rates, strata levy notices, and we prepare settlement figures. So that also happens within that 6-week period.
So there's all this paperwork that has to go on, including, when you talk about, settlement statements, that's basically, working out who gets what money. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So at settlement, even though it's in an electronic workspace, there's still the same party. So you've still got the vendor and their bank and their conveyancer or solicitor, and you've got the purchaser and their bank and their conveyancer and solicitor. So even though a purchaser or a vendor, they don't actually attend settlement at all. That's what your representative does. So that's what your conveyancer does. So you don't have to attend, don't have to be there, you don't have to be online.
That's great.
Yeah.
You just have to be at the agent to pick up the keys when it's all done.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, cool. Well, look, we're nearly at the end. Amanda, I just want to talk about one more thing. Obviously, it comes down to dollars and the cost of for someone who's buying. What can I expect to pay for the services of someone like yourself, and what does that look like? So obviously there's always that saying, you get what you pay for, but from what I've seen, it looks as though there are conveyancers out there who charge really, really low fees, like anywhere as low as sort of $800 through to some costs up to the $2,000, $2,500. Can you kind of briefly take us through what is the cost and how does that work?
Yeah, look, you'll find that the ones that are quoting about $800 or $900, that's generally just their professional fee, and then there'll probably be about another $800 or $900 easily in what they'll call disbursements. And so that will be cost for your council rates, your water rates, and your strata levies. So all conveyancers and solicitors, or all the ones I know of, will order those and pay for them, and then pass those costs on to you as a buyer or a seller at settlement on their tax invoice. So you will generally be paying no less than about $1,800 up to probably about $2,200. So I always say to clients, look, allow in your budget between $2,000 and $2,500. It's rare that you'll probably be paying $2,500, but allow about $2,000. And that, like you say, you do get what you pay for. So you want to make sure you get a really experienced conveyancer, because don't go for the cheapest. This is your biggest asset that you're buying. Make sure that you're confident and comfortable that they know what they're doing and they're not the cheapest one around. So, and conveyancers and solicitors will have different ways of structuring their fees, but you will find that even though you may be quoted $800 or $900, that's without the disbursements. So just be aware of that. So when
when talking to a conveyancer and trying to understand how much am I going to outlay, maybe a good question to ask is, look, what can I expect? What do I need to budget for in total, including your fees, including any other costs, and then use that to really to make sure I know what I'm budgeting for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And budget, allow a bit of wiggle room in there, but make sure that you've got enough money, and make sure that the conveyancer talks to you early about that, and it's really clear, so that you really fully understand what your obligations are, and how much money you're going to have to pay on top of whatever amount you're borrowing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Amanda, that's really great. You've given us a really comprehensive understanding of what you do as a conveyancer. What are the things that I need to look out for as a buyer? What are the important things, and also a sense of the cost. So look, I'd really like to take the opportunity to thank you very much for your time. It's been really insightful. Hopefully that removes some of the mysteries of the legal side of buying property. We'd love to have you back again. Thanks for coming on board, Amanda, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Thank you. It's great to know what's happening out there, and it's great to be able to answer those questions and give a bit of clarity around what happens.
Absolutely. All right, Amanda, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. That's another Cura Property Buyers Agents on the Ground podcast. We'll see you next time.